It's great to be back here at Northaven Methodist Church, and especially with DACPOC, Dallas Area Christian Progressive Alliance. I've been in and out a lot and various places. Coming back here to Dallas is always an interesting thing, because when people ask me where I'm from, you know, I say, well, the belly of the beast. And if you know Dallas, you probably get an idea what I'm talking about. But I often also say, you know, to our friends, to my students and other collaborators, if we can do it here, we can do it anywhere. And this is really true. In some ways, we're facing some battles here that are typical, that are specific ones. But there's things going on that are actually very hopeful. And it seems to me the Occupy movement is one of them. And we need to be proud that we have a movement here in Dallas that's doing some significant stuff. Unfortunately, I've been in and out so much that I know more about some other Occupy movements than what's going on in my own city. But let me just see here, are there some Dallas occupiers here? Some people that have worked with Occupy here in Dallas, and maybe off and on we have, you know, you've been down behind City Hall or at some of the marches, and whatever is happening this spring, this is coming back. You've probably heard about the 99% spring. That's something that I think we really have to pay attention to a lot more. And why that is, I want to talk about tonight. This is really what I would like to talk about. Why is this so important? I think this is more than just another social movement. This is something that's critical to the future of all kinds of things, including, and I want to be very specific about this, including the future of the church itself. I kept hearing, and I'm looking at Eric Volker is back there, the pastor of this church. I keep hearing Eric referenced as one of the chaplains of the Dallas Occupy movement. So that's a great title to have. I was in Boston about 2 weeks ago, and there's a group of PhD students at Harvard University that invited me also to talk about some of these things. And there's a young woman at Harvard who's the founder of the Occupy Chaplains, and that's a fascinating movement. To see that there are young people that are doing what these folks are doing, and they're doing it not just because they want to be progressive and hip and doing something cool. They're doing it because of a deep commitment to their Christian faith. This is amazing, I think, but it shows you what can happen, what's possible. There's a group at Harvard, not just religious PhD students, but others that have founded Occupy Harvard. We do not have Occupy SMU. I say with regret, and I'm not sure we'll have it anytime very soon. But we're working towards it, so bear with us. Maybe a couple of years down the road we'll have that too. But there are things going on in many places. At this point, one reason why I haven't gotten out much except for travels, a colleague of mine, an Asian woman theologian, also in Boston, at the Episcopal Community School, and myself have been working on a book on the Occupy movement that's titled Occupy Religion. Occupy Religion, right? Theology of the Multitude. And we see this really as a theology that's bringing various streams and channels of liberation theologies together, womanist theology, feminist theology, black theology, Asian theology, economic theology, and so on. Those things, various movements in which we have been involved ourselves, Leon and myself, pulling those together in a way. We'll see, you know, it may work, it may push us into a different era. Last fall, we've had Occupy AAR, and if you know what AAR is, the American Academy of Religion. A scary place where we have 8,000 religionists coming together, very serious about religion. And some of this group is organized group. Occupy AAR, Occupy the American Academy of Literature, as well as the Society of Biblical Literature, which reads at the same time. So we have about 15,000 people. Of course, maybe we had about 200, but that's big going on in addition to all the other meetings. And some junior people, some senior people, and everything else in between. So stuff is happening. Keep watching out for that. Somebody told me when I came in, I looked younger when they saw me last time, so I don't know why it is. Maybe I keep getting younger, but my eyes keep getting older, so I can see some of my notes. Anyways, those were just a couple of preparatory remarks. Let me talk about some of the issues here. First of all, why is there an Occupy Wall Street movement? That's, I think, one of the really interesting questions. Why do we have to occupy a place like Wall Street? Well, one response would be that maybe Wall Street is one of the most occupied places in the world to begin with. One way to describe that is to say it's occupied by a certain logic. There is a way of thinking, a sort of orthodoxy, economic orthodoxy on Wall Street that you have to follow and that people keep believing in. You know, whether it works or whether it doesn't work, it's not the question. But there's this logic, and we're going to stick with it, even if everything else breaks down. We've seen this in the recent economic downturn, 2008, 2009. What happened with the Great Depression in the 20s was different. When we had depression happening, people started to raise questions about business logic. They started to think about how economics could be done differently. They started to think about issues of class. Again, in the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, that did not happen. I mean, a couple of questions raised, but basically, the big idea was let's get back to business as usual. And since the economy goes in cycles, it's going down now, it will go up again. Now, that is actually true. The economy still goes in cycles. Went down, it's going up. Of course, what you realize is if your people are benefiting from the fact that the economy goes in cycles. So it goes in cycles, it goes up again. The market indicators are rising again. You can see this. But if your people are benefiting from it, this is the point, by the way, of no rising tide. This belief that the rising tide will lift all boats is no longer really connected to reality. This is something that's not working anymore. And you're realizing that there's something happening that while the economy keeps going in circles, our fate is not going in cycles at all. And that includes, this is the important thing, especially for a group like the ones gathered here tonight, including myself, that includes the middle class. For a long time, we've been talking about the poor. One of my first books 14 years ago was titled Remember the Poor. And that was a time, we talked a lot about the poor in the 90s, and sometimes the churches did too. But we thought it was about other people. We thought this was about, people down somewhere, under the bridges in downtown or, South Dallas or somewhere, or south of the border, Mexico or further south. Now we're realizing it affects us all. I'll be talking a lot more about that because I think this is the big thing that's changing. We're beginning to realize this is not just about others. This is really about us. The thing I want to introduce at the end, but let me give you a bit of an idea now, is what I have started to call deep solidarity. There was a time when solidarity, many of us gathered here were in solidarity with other people and did a lot of work, but very often we understood this solidarity as something that we could control. So we would make a decision to be in solidarity with someone else. And that meant we did a lot of good things. We did many important projects. And Northaven was one of the leaders of that. Very pretty. Things that were located here were all very important. But it was a sort of solidarity where we still had the feeling we have a bit of control. We can move in, we can move out, we can do more, we can do less. It's ultimately up to us. The difference with deep solidarity is that we're realizing you're in the same boat. That's what's changing. It's no longer something that we can control, where those of us who may be middle class or better off have something, we can, some adjustments that we can make, or some decisions that we can make, whether we like it or not, whether we want to embrace it or not. Now the situation is such that we may have to face the truth that we are sitting in the same boat, and that changes everything. I'll get back to that. So, Occupy Wall Street in some ways recognizes that Wall Street is occupied by a certain logic, and we need to present something else. We need to present an alternative, another logic. Another world is possible as the world of social movements have said. Well, I think this is not just the case for Wall Street. I think this is really also the case for our churches, for our religious communities, or I work at SMU in the university context. It's true for our universities also. Very often, we are occupied by a certain logic. And this is the dominant logic, or what Occupy calls the logic of the 1%. There's something that we think this is the way the world goes, we have to run our business accordingly. And whether that's a business, a corporation, or whether that's a university or a church, it really doesn't matter. We basically have the same business principles, and anybody can take these classes, anybody can follow that logic, and that's how you'll be successful. That is the basic logic that we have bought into. And then, of course, we can play our own little games on the side, but this sort of thing cannot change. More specifically, it seems to me that religion itself is more and more shaped by the logic of this 1%. So now we have images of God. Of course, not in this building here, and maybe not in any physical form, but what's in the back of people's minds? Images of God as CEO, as the capital CEO who controls everything from the top down. I mean, watch yourself pray. What are we praying for? How are we praying? God, do this, God, do that. Sort of fixing God from the top down. Erase the magic wand. Or send somebody else out there to do the dirty work, right? Hire a workforce, and gets the job done. I mean, in terms of these top-down images, this is very progressive. God has the top-down order. The gospel of prosperity, of course, is the best image for that, right? Now, as mainline Christians, of course, we don't want to have anything to do with that. But I'm wondering if part of our logic, sort of stuff that we carry with us deep down without ever being aware of it, is not also like that. What's the parallel is? You're looking for God, or are you looking up, right? You're looking up towards the sky, or you're looking up towards the upper levels of power, the upper levels of the skyscrapers, the steeples of the church buildings, the corner offices. I had this wonderful corner office at Perkins that got destroyed when they renovated the building. So that's not gone. And I feel like some of my power has been slashed. We look up, we keep looking up, and it's a bit, I'm not blaming anyone for it. I catch myself doing God up there somewhere, right? That's part of that all-pervasive logic of the 1%. The way we expect God to take care of things. So this logic of the 1% is a lot more pervasive. It's not just what business people do on Wall Street, but it's something that's also deeply ingrained in our own personal faith, in how we relate to God, how the churches relate to God. How red wine was sorry, I shouldn't do this here, but you see what I'm saying? This is the sort of stuff that's so always there that we probably know a little more. Or think about your own theology. When you say that Jesus is Lord, what is it that you mean? Well, the early Christians, when they said Jesus is Lord, was something completely different. They said Jesus is Lord and meant, and the emperor is not. Now,
imagine if we recapture some of that. So here, of course, my point is not to make anybody feel bad. My point is, what would happen if we recaptured some of our roots of our own Christian faith? What if we said Jesus is Lord and Wall Street is not? Jesus is Lord and the powers that be are not. Jesus is Lord and the great theologians are not. The bishops are not. Not even the pastor. That is kind of those. But this is something that's deeply rooted in our Christian faith that we don't have to put up now as modern progressives thinking, how can we modernize this? In some ways, what we have to do is go back to some of this heritage. Or if I test my students, this is a funny thing, but it works almost every time, in terms of that all-pervasive logic. For a lot of students, it's easier to think about the world ending, going up in flames or something like that, or Jesus coming back and what's all gone, who knows what happens next. Easier to think about the world going up in flames than capitalism ever ended. Capitalism is here to stay. That's the one thing that's not negotiable. This earth may burn up. Texas may go up in flames, or at least be swallowed in a heat wave that never ends. But capitalism is here to stay. We will have NAFTA and just we have NAFTA and CAFTA and free trade. That's not negotiable. But the world's going to end, So this is what I mean when I say there's this all-pervasive logic of the 1% that goes deep, not just among the 1%, but really among the rest of us as well. Now, what do we do with that? One of the key insights of the Occupy movement, it seems to me, is that there is now talk about the difference between the 1% and the 99%. I think this is incredibly interesting because when in the 90s we talked about, the poor, we thought, oh, maybe there's a 1% that's poor. That seems like a special interest group that we can deal with if we appreciate it or if we choose to do so. But everybody else is really not like that. Now we're talking about the 99%. That means that more and more of us are in the same boat, not benefiting from this rising tide anymore. Well, 1% of course is doing really well. I mean, just look at the housing market in Dallas. There's parts of the housing market that's doing really well, that's making money, that increases value. And the housing market for 99%, of course, was very different. Now, when we talk like that, very quickly, of course, people get uncomfortable, especially with Christian people, because it looks like we shouldn't be so judgmental. We shouldn't think about classes like that, because then very quickly we get accused of engaging in class warfare. Right now, you're just playing off the 99% against the 1%. You're demonizing the 1%. You're doing bad stuff to people that are really good. But this, I think, is what the talk about the 1% and the 99% might help us overcome. Talking about that is not to demonize anyone. In fact, it's about a word I'm just making up, it's not in my notes, about demonizing people. This is something where you're actually not demonizing, blaming someone, but you're figuring out why is it that things are the way they are. And so instead of talking about evil people, instead of talking about mean people who are 1%, or say greedy people, we hear that a lot, like greedy CEOs get blamed for the misery in which we find ourselves. Now you don't have to blame anybody. You don't have to say that they're especially bad people at the top or in Washington or on Wall Street. You simply have to say there's a division here that runs our lives. There's a system here that does something to us. And what we have to do is recognize it and understand how that's running our lives, no matter whether we're part of the 99% or whether we're part of the 1%. And even when we talk about the 99% and the 1%,
there's always the possibility that you can place yourself on one side or the other. If you Google on the internet, there's a website that is the 1% for the 99%. Very interesting because we have people who belong to the 1% economically, who put themselves on the side of the 99%. They're very thoughtful stuff, and they do the same thing as the 99%. There's We Are the 99% website where people hold up little signs and tell their stories. The 1% do the same thing. Hold up little signs and tell their stories and say why they place themselves on the side of the 1%, of the 99%. So here, it's not about demonizing anybody or waging class warfare. It's simply about figuring out who benefits from this system and who doesn't. And we're beginning to realize that fewer and fewer people are really in that group that ultimately benefits from it. But still, we have to talk about this topic called inequality. We hate to do it, something that we don't like to do as Americans, but this is, I think, one of the basic accomplishments of the Occupy movement. It makes us talk about inequality, even though that makes us uncomfortable. Now, if I started to talk about class, of course, that would make us even more uncomfortable, because that's the sort of term, it's not a four-letter word technically, it has 5 letters, but it's treated as a four-letter word that we're not really supposed to bring up. But perhaps we need to do so sometimes. Because the sort of class issue that the Occupy movement raises with us is something that goes to the core of our existence. It's something that shapes us much more than we commonly realize. What I said a moment ago about this logic of the 1% that shapes us is also true about class. There's the logic of the 1% as a class that shapes us as the 99%. And when we recognize that, perhaps we can do something about it and find some alternatives. Now, in the United States, when we talk about class, very often we talk about stratification, income levels, perhaps, right? So we talk about poverty levels, and that's defined in terms of the monetary value. We consider people that make less than a certain amount, and they are below the poverty level. Or we can say, that people that make above 100,000, they belong to the upper middle class, and then you're a millionaire, and so on. But class and social stratification is still not what the Occupy movement talks about. The Occupy movement talks about class as a relationship, which is different than class as stratification. Right? It's not here's a class, there's a class, and look, we can move you up, like that's the old American thing. The Occupy movement says maybe class has something to do with how we relate to each other. Now, we never see it because our ideologies are like this. The biggest one here as Americans, we believe in individualism. That is to say, we believe that all that we have ever accomplished, we have accomplished because of our own qualities, of our own goodness, of our own education, of our own hard work, and so on. That works really well at the top. So in my own case, as internationally prominent theologian, I can go out there now and say, I got where I am because I'm just extraordinarily smart. And I'm German too. That sort of stuff that'll move you up. And so it's just one of my British colleagues once, when he was asked why he wrote in such a way that it wasn't too complicated and hard to read, he said, well, this is so that only superior people can understand it. He was only half kidding. Or if you're a millionaire, very flattering to tell yourself, this comes because of my hard work. But then if you see that in our society, the top investor makes 20,000 times what a worker makes, you have to ask yourself the question, how is it possible to work 20,000 times more than somebody who already works as much as they can. We have an old saying in Germany that the day has 24 hours, and if that's not enough, you work at night. But that's not 20,000 times more. I mean, see what I'm saying? If you think about these incredible divisions where, some of the poorest people in the society have more than one job. They don't only work 40 hours a week, they work 60 or 80 or even more to make ends meet. And then they're still not able to feed their families. Whereas other people who also work hard, then make incredible amounts of money. Individualism doesn't quite explain that. In fact, individualism, I call it the myth of the successful. It's what those of us who are successful like to tell ourselves because it makes us look better. And because then we don't have to acknowledge the help that we got and the fact that we sometimes build our own careers and our own fortunes on the back of other people. So this is what I mean when I say class is a relationship. I mean, we have to face the fact that this individualism is really a story that's perhaps no longer true. Or if you want to test yourself, go home and tell your mother that you're an individual, that you raised yourself, cleaned your own diapers, taught yourself how to swim without your ball. It's not going to do so well. Not that I haven't tried, but. So here, talking about the 1% and the 99%, we now have to talk about how class functions in our society, who wins, who loses. And here, at this point in my talk, this is why I really need my glasses, because there are all these numbers. If you look at the numbers, it's really very interesting. If you look at this 99%, 1% relationship, you really realize there's something going on in our society that's certainly economic in nature, but that goes much deeper, that shapes us all the way to the core, including our deepest ideas, wishes, hopes, and our religion. By the way, the person who came up with the notion was none other than Joseph Stiglitz, a respected economist, Nobel Prize winner. Somebody who can't really be suspected of just being idle, but he talked about the fact that there's this deep division here. We're in the United States. 1% now own more than half of the wealth of the whole country. And what's more important, of course, is not just that 1% have half of the wealth, but they have more of that power. That's what really matters. It's not just about monetary value, but it's about who's calling the shots, who can shape what we're doing, who can shape the way things are happening. In the United States, 400 individuals have more wealth than 60% of all Americans. And 400 individuals have more wealth in the United States than 60% of all Americans. Now, you might say that's capitalism. But if you look back in our history, you find about 50 years ago, we also had capitalism, but not these deep divisions. This is something that's happening more and more, and this is the direction in which we keep going, unless something happens. So it's not just, well, this is capitalism, yes or no, but we used to have actually with a much friendlier face in our own past. In 1962, for instance, not that I recall it much, but 1962, the numbers say the wealthiest 1% of all households averaged 125% of the wealth of the median household. 2009, the wealthiest 1% averaged 225 times the wealth of the median household. And this is just looking at, middle class and upper class. Between 1979 and 2007, incomes grew by 275% for the wealthiest 1% of households. Between 1979 and 2007, the wealthiest 1% of households had income gains of 275%. At the same time, The middle 60% of households had income gains of 37%. 18% of the poorest had 20% income gains between 1979 and 2000. If you look at the context from the outside, you have to say that the United States is more divided by class than any other country in the so-called first world, including China. Our class divisions are deeper than any other first world country, including China. In terms of income inequality, we're peered with countries like Cameroon, Madagascar, Rwanda, Uganda, and Ecuador. I mean, just compare yourself as a country and you realize this is a significant thing. The numbers also say that social mobility in the United States is lower than in many other places, including England. If you think of England, you don't think of a country that has high social mobility necessarily, but our social mobility, the so-called American dream, is less of a reality here than even in places like England. So what we're saying here is there's something really significant happening, and it's not just a matter of pocketbook numbers and finances. It's really about power, who shapes what, and who shapes the way we live our lives and ultimately we think. I think the church especially also has to think about this, because I'm wondering more and more whether some of the things that we're facing in the churches are not also tied to that. If I'm thinking about my own students that leave seminary every year, that graduate from seminary every year, their biggest challenges are not necessarily theological. Their biggest challenges are ultimately, how do we keep the beast going back? How do we make sure we don't say anything that offends anybody who has any, not just money, but also power? And that becomes a problem for the church that's not just about the pocketbook, that ultimately becomes a deep problem for the Christian faith. Because what we're doing in the seminary is we're training people, hopefully, to understand something about matters of the holy. Then it gets very quickly wasted when people get to the church, where they're told, there are certain things you can't say. And even some of our Bible courses, in terms of liberal conservative divisions that we've had for a while, maybe you can discuss the virgin birth, you can discuss the divinity of Jesus and all these things. That's dangerous. Then discussing the sort of issues of who's in power, who models God, and what do we really know, or what do we really mean when we say Jesus Christ is Lord. So, these are some of the issues I addressed in the Rising Times, but this came out in 2009 before the Occupy movement. And I wasn't quite as clear then about this difference between the 1% and the 99% as I know. But what I realized in that book was that the middle class is really not safe in the middle anymore. We think of the middle perhaps as a place of balance, as a place of rest, as a place of comfort, a place of security. But the middle class is pulled into this struggle of the 99% and the 1%, whether we like it or not. Very often, as middle class people, if we're doing okay, we think our lot is cast at 1%. But think again. It may look like that, but things can change quickly. And even if you're doing well for yourself, think about your friends. Think about people that you know. Think about whether you know some people who lost their jobs, or whether you know some people who got rehired at a lower grade job, or who lost their benefits, or who lost their health insurance. Or think about what's going to happen to your children and grandchildren. Maybe not right away, but down the road. What kind of jobs they will have, whether they will ever have health care, and whether they will have pension plans, or 401k plans that are worth it, is another question. Now, those are tough questions, and maybe you're not expecting those questions in church, but it seems to me this is the sort of question that we as middle class people have to raise more
not just because it's about numbers, it's about the way we live our lives and who shapes these lives. Now, I promised you I would not make this into a critique simply or complaint. Certainly not a complaint here. It's simply a way of analyzing where we are, what we're up against. In order to raise the question, how can we make a difference? That's the point. The point is not complaining. The point is really looking for viable alternatives. Now, alternatives need to be making a difference, and I think this is what you usually get when people don't do that hard analysis in terms of the real conflicts and divisions. They come out with something like it. You see this at the Miss Universe pageants all the time. When people are looking, what do you want? What do you really care about? World peace. Why can't we all get along? Well, yes, indeed. Why can't we all get along? Now, usually it's not a big deal, right? We could get along if we just try to or wanted to, but that's not going to get us there. One of my favorite passages from the prophet Jeremiah reads, "They have treated the wound of my people carelessly, saying, 'Peace, peace,' when there is no peace." But even the peace movement sometimes kind of doesn't help us because it glances over some of these tensions. Now, I'm all for peace, don't get me wrong, but if you move in too quickly, if you heal these tensions too quickly, because before you've addressed them, you have that situation where you're treating the wounds of the people carelessly, and ultimately people keep dying instead of getting better. So, what do we do? Bishop Desmond Tutu, you know the name from the South African liberation struggle, once had a meeting that I like. He said, if there's an elephant who's standing on the tail of a mouse, and you decide to stay neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. Right? If there's an elephant who's standing on the tail of a mouse, and you decide to stay neutral, that mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. So here, the question really is, as we move towards solutions, can we afford to stay neutral? Can we afford to pretend as if we're still in the middle, not affected by this? One thing we realized in Nazi Germany, before I was born, but we worked on this much later, was that if there's a situation of grave injustice, of great imbalances of power, and you keep out of it, you're ultimately supporting this status quo. You're becoming part of the problem, if you like it or not. So here, maybe stay neutral is not even a choice anymore. So what else can we do? Well, this is of course the thing that usually drives liberals up the wall. And this is the thing that perhaps you have to take sides. You have to take a stand, you have to make a decision. Now, if you look through the Bible, this is an old story, you know, God taking sides in many ways from the very beginning. The old stories of Exodus, God taking the side of the Hebrew slaves. You know, we have God talking out of the burning bush in Exodus 3. A wonderful story, you know, that most people think is about God talking out of trees and vegetables and bushes. It isn't. It's a story about God choosing sides and announcing to Moses, "We will lead the people out of Egypt." That's the burning bush story. You know, it's not about whether God can talk out of trees and bushes or not. It's God taking sides, you know. And the story continues that way when the people are taken away into Babylonian exile. God again takes sides. In Jesus Christ, God takes sides. Jesus' mother herself takes sides in her wonderful speech, Magnificat, Mary's song of praise. She talks about God who's lifted up the lowly. We know these wonderful passages we read
same time pushing the powerful from their thrones and sending the rich away empty. This is Mary, the mother of Jesus. I mean, we have this beautiful image of Mary as a very gentle person who's always very deep and also very sad. But she's also very angry. And she talks about God taking sides. Now, hopefully not taking sides in such a way that you're not demonizing the 1%. But maybe you think that will eventually save the 1% is being sent away hungry once in a while. Maybe that will wake you up. Maybe this is something that you need in order to be brought back into the kingdom. This is something that you need in order to be brought back into the community. Now, I know this is harsh language, and it's not about mediating and reconciling right away, but this taking sides at the moment is very deeply ingrained in our Jewish and our Christian traditions, and it's ingrained certainly also, we see it much clearer in the Muslim traditions. But maybe that's a bit different. Maybe that's not about demonizing, that's not about playing people off against each other, it's about making a difference. If you look at how differences have to be made in our own history, this is not the Occupy movement, but look back a little bit. Differences have to be made in our own history in the United States by people, including the churches, taking sides. The civil rights movement wasn't just about let's all be friends, but it was in many ways about taking up the cause of the marginalized communities in order to bring everybody back together. Or have you ever thought, how did it come to pass that we have women voting? We have elections coming up this year. Half of the population wasn't allowed to vote. Now we have the women's vote. Well, that came by women standing up and by some men taking their sides. That was about taking sides. Or if you enjoyed being here tonight, the fact that many, or some of us at least, still have 8-hour work days, that we have weekends off, or we can come to church on Sunday, those things also were accomplished by people taking sides. They were accomplished by the unions, by people taking the sides of the working class. Working people fought for those things. The fact that we have pension plans, the fact that we have health care. None of these things were ever just there, or given by whenever we lead from the top, or given by somebody who was just very insightful, and not even some of the other accomplishments that we were necessarily always given from the top down. A lot of this came to pass because people stood up, people took their sides. And here's the religious moment. A lot of times, religious communities were part of that. There was a religion and labor movement that worked alongside the unions. There were courageous women and some men who worked alongside the suffragists. There were, of course, many religious labor, religious civil rights leaders who were very prominent in the civil rights movement, some of them right here in Dallas. Now the challenge is what will happen in the Occupy movement. There is a possibility that religion can play a role, not in leadership as it was in the old days, perhaps, but the real question is, are we going to be there or not? And not necessarily whether we're going to just leave the tents behind St. Paul, but whether churches recognize this as an important issue where taking sides now is required. That's the question for churches. The theological question always is, where is God? And if we have a long line of stories about God taking sides, that now is the other question for us, Is God taking sides in this struggle? Look at the Jesus stories, I think it's pretty obvious. God is there with the common people. There is something about the least of these. Matthew 25, there are sayings like, you can observe two masters, God and mammon. there are sayings like the last shall be the first, or the first shall be the last. All of that has something to do with Perkins' ice. There's even a story about camels and needles of ice. That's really very funny. Jesus had a sense of humor. How hard is it for a rich person to go to heaven? More difficult than a camel going through a needle's eye. And that story, ever since Jesus told it, people have tried to explain it away. There's an amazing fantasy wall in terms of that where camels can get in if they really try. They down on their knees to get rid of their baggage through the door. Whew, you say today. That's the original story in the Gospels. That's not how the disciples respond. When Jesus has this wonderful saying about the camel and the needle's eye, the disciples are scared to death and say, well, then who can be saved? They don't see a way out. They don't see this as a neat little story about camels having a hard time getting through a gate. This is not possible by humanity, by human beings, say the disciples. And then Jesus responds as well, it's not possible, but God can do amazing things. But how does it happen? That is the question. It doesn't really happen by patting people on the back forever, or by simply telling people what they want to hear so that they donate more, or that you're not walking the apple cart, or that you're not doing anything with your friends in the park. That's not how it works. So where is God? I go out and live here to say, perhaps we're seeing more of God in the Occupy movement. And I do not want to identify God with the Occupy movement, but perhaps we're seeing more of God in the Occupy movement these days than we're seeing of God in our own churches, or in our schools of theology, or in our theology books. Now, that may be a scary thought, but it's also an intriguing thought. Because it's really saying something about God being at work, God not being asleep at God actually being there, and it's up to us if you really want to meet God or not. I mean, how often do we get up on Sunday mornings in order to meet God in church? What if you got up once in a while in order to meet God in the streets as it were? I often say to my students, the question is not what would Jesus do? The question is, what is Jesus doing? And if you think about the guy, more likely that he spends his time walking the dusty roads of our cities than hanging too much in the sanctuaries. What is Jesus doing? Well, unless he had a change of pace there, I think we still have to follow Jesus into the streets there. So now, all of a sudden, there's a movement that, of course, we have to look at from all kinds of angles. And I'm not arguing that we simply have to follow it hook, line, and sinker. But there's a movement that resembles, in some ways, other movements that we've experienced in our own history. Movements that go all the way back to the Jesus movement. And this is what I mean by solidarity. Let me just say a few words in conclusion about this theme of solidarity. As we're beginning to realize that perhaps the 99%, most of us, are really much more in the same boat than we ever knew, things can change. This is now solidarity that comes not out of generosity or the decision of the will of people who are better off, but this comes out of our own understanding that the system ultimately is going to kill us all. And if you add up not just economic problems, but social issues, cultural issues, including ecological questions like global warming, I'm not just speaking metaphorically. This thing may wipe out much of humanity as we know it. So here, deep solidarity may not be so much a choice, but a matter of survival, understanding that we are together in this, that perhaps God is together with us in this as well. Now,
Kim asked me to talk about some specific projects, and I just want to mention maybe one or two here, because we can do that in the discussion. We're all involved in projects that need to be lifted up. But I found the labor issue to be very crucial in this regard, because it's such a common issue that in so many ways ties us together. We're all people who, or most of us anyway, who make our living through work and through labor. And the labor issues, sometimes we see them as special interest issues, maybe for white males who overall working in factories, or for specific groups of people that are exploited, or perhaps for people whose wages are stolen. But I think this is, again, the question of the 99%. One thing that we realized that the worker rights board, Kim mentioned it in the beginning, this is to North, this is jobs for justice. We have a worker rights board that does some hearings on labor issues. We've had a few hearings on the issue of unemployment. What we realized was the issue of unemployment is not really a private special interest of unemployed people. The issue of unemployment is really the issue that affects us as a community. Very practically speaking, a lot of the corporations are using the unemployed to pit them against the employed to drive down wages, to cut away benefits, to make even the life of people who still have a job more miserable, to make it work harder, to make it work for less, to make it take less vacation time and so on. So the question of unemployment here is not just about some people who lose their jobs occasionally. This is about how the society as a whole shapes up, how my own job ultimately continues or doesn't, how we are played off not just in this country, but how we're played off globally. The worker here in Dallas against the worker in Singapore, or in Maquiladora, just south of the border. So here's a practical issue that goes much deeper. That's also theological, by the way, because if you think about God, what really marks God in creation stories right in the beginning of the Bible is that God's a worker. God does this work with his own hands, as it were. Male images of God, patriarchal perhaps, but God's a worker. God's doing stuff. And God then rests on day number 7. There's the weekend. All these Christian employers and business people didn't really think much about that until the workers brought it back to their attention. It might be a good idea to have a day of rest if you're working all the time. And so in some ways you could say we need each other. In some ways you could say perhaps the workers in that situation brought back to our attention something that's at the core of our Jewish and our Christian traditions in a way that we haven't thought about in a long time. So here, labor issues. North Texas Job of Justice, the worker rights of labor. The other issue, and since we have Bob in the room here, is the free trade agreement. This is the sort of thing that we think about also, not as a social issue that affects other people, but as a matter of relationship. Not just what happens to them, but also what happens to us. It's a two-way street, and very often we thought, well, this is just works splendidly for us, and everybody else going to suffer, so we don't worry about it. But now these things are coming back, and I think we have to think about them much more in terms of what they do to all of us, how we're all together in this one road here. So those are two examples. I'm happy to talk more about them if you have questions. But at this point, we need to move on to our discussion. So can you want to? Yes.
I wanted to say that what we usually do the evening is we'll have about 15 to 20 minutes of questions or so, depending on how many that we have. We generally adjourn and have more informal discussion and give refreshments outside. Before we do that, we won't have an altar call, but we will be passing new plates. And we do this to support, and how it's a love offering, however you would like to support financially our faith
Yes, that's it. Faith, Voices on Justice.
So any of those that you're interested in, you can see them including the ones on our site. I'll just let you take questions.
Yes, please. Would you go to the microphone, please?
Tell us about the event in Washington, D.C. and where you're going and what is the plans, what are the dynamics?
You're talking about the 99% spring or the specific
I
action?
think the main is going to be a big gathering and everything to do with the environment.
Yes.
99 beyond.
I don't know if anyone is directly involved in that. I'm not as directly involved, so I don't know exactly what all is. No, I'm not going myself. I'm actually following some other relations, but thanks for bringing that to our attention. It's very important to take these individual actions very seriously, not just as in our calendars, but as something that's very crucial to our everyday lifestyle. So thank you for bringing them.
I found myself herded into a meeting of occupiers this week in which they were talking about the Trans-Pacific Pipeline, the proposed free trade zone between Asia and the U.S., and how they will be meeting here in May to kind of solidify this deal. A friend of mine also brought up the idea that Citibank chose to come to Dallas for their shareholders meeting. And the reason they propose that these people are coming to Dallas is because we're so docile. So what is it that we should be doing in May?
Right. TPP, the Trans-Pacific Pipeline partnership, what is it exactly? The Trans-Pacific Partnership, that is the correct term, right? Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is like NAFTA, a free trade agreement that is now done, across the Pacific. And of course, we can talk a lot about what that means, but as I was saying, a lot of these partnerships, these free trade agreements, follow the logic of the 1%. So somebody makes a lot of profit, we're told this would help us all, rising tide lifts all boats, it's still a long way, but we're realizing perhaps it doesn't help everybody. So that is the basic reason, I think, why we have to be concerned whether these things are ultimately driven in such a way that they benefit the people, or whether they're just benefiting a smaller group of privileged people. That is a basic question. And in May, there's going to be a big meeting here where's it exactly? Madison, I believe, right? And so there are people, activists from all over the country, maybe international group even coming in, and maybe Bob, we need to talk about this more because we're in the middle of that. One reason why they're doing it here, thanks for mentioning this church also, is because they think Dallas is the easiest place to be. This is not like the Battle of Seattle, but this is a place where people are not going to pay much attention to. Now, what should we do? There was a time, when Christians basically hung out in churches and did churchy stuff together. Then there was a time when Christians became more aware of the needs of the world, went out into soup kitchens and established, all kinds of important projects that made a difference in people's lives, got involved in after-school care, education, and so on, which was great. But I think what we really need to do as Christians, as church people, is to realize that these issues are at the core of what it means to be a Christian now. So whatever we do in terms of the actions are very important, and I encourage you all to pay attention to what's going on and to participate. But what we really need is to pull it back together and to understand that this may well be at the core of our identity as Christian people, and that God has something to say about that. Pull God out of it. It's not like God is silent. But pull God out of it, so usually it looks like God is enforcing that. God is undecided on which that's supposed to be. In this case, I think we need to have a witness that this is not the case. In fascist Germany, one of the next question. Yes, I want to just finish that thought a little bit here. In fascist Germany, one of the big things was the Kirchenkampf, the struggle of the churches. And what that meant was not the struggle of the churches against the state, as is oftentimes assumed. It was the struggle of the churches against themselves. Because there were most churches always on the side of the status quo. And there were churches that woke up, church people, sometimes groups, Sunday school classes that woke up and that stood up for something else. So perhaps what it really takes is to develop this new consciousness in our own churches as we are developing on the streets as well.
I guess I'm sort of a broken record on this subject. My big deal is to know what to do next. You mentioned 2 projects kind of in passing, and I think it would be really helpful. I don't know whether you could, Kim probably already knows the contact information for Jobs for Justice.
Yes.
And, but we need to know exactly how to connect with that, and if it's going to go beyond this room, and I would really appreciate the specifics of what we do next.
Thank you. This may be a funny comment here, but yesterday we had a PhD dissertation defense of one of my students, Kevin Minister is his name, and we had a Princeton professor who was an outside reader who was in his 60s and who said, this is one of the best dissertations that he's ever seen in his life. This was a Perkins student, PhD dissertation. Part of that PhD dissertation is he's a systematic theologian, but part of it is his own assessment of the Dallas Worker Rights Board issues. The sort of things that we found, that we wrestled with, and that somehow made him think about theology, questions of God, questions of the church, of the Holy Spirit, all that stuff differently. And he came, to the point where his outside reader said that may be one of the best dissertations ever. So this is simply to say that what we're doing has, in some ways, changed people's lives. It may not always have changed the social climate in the city. We usually do these worker rights sports hearings 3 or 4 times a year, so it's not a big commitment for anybody who wants to be part of it. If you do, please contact me. The easiest way to contact me is if you keep your program, you can spell my name, J-O-R-G, not J-O-R-G, like it said on one of the programs, Rieger.com. You see, you get to my own website, joergrieger.com, and there's a link that says economics. You click on that, that takes you to Northaven's Job of Justice, and it takes you also to the Dallas Worker Rights Board. LaborDallas.org is the website of Northaven's Job of Justice, which very often links all the other activities that are going on as well. But the reason why this is important is not just because we need to save the world. We really do. I mean, there are some issues that were very eye-opening to me. For instance, we had some hearings about construction workers in Dallas. That's the sort of stuff you do not learn about from reading the Dallas Morning News. We always do a series of publicly as press conferences. And we even got a very nice report one year, Labor Day, from Fox News. But in several years, we never once had the Dallas Morning News show up and do a report. We've got news coverage on TV, but not even the Dallas Morning News pays attention to these kinds of questions. So what I'm saying here is this is perhaps something that is also needed just to inform us and to wake us up in the churches as church people. Yes, please.
Joerg, I guess this is maybe for Kim, especially, and as well as some of these people who may be coming to town as a part of the movement. One of the things I'm thinking of is radical study. And has there been talk yet about accommodations, maybe in private homes, or some of us locals would be especially supportive is to try to open up our homes. Or, I don't have much space in my place, but I do open up my living room, my sofa bed, in our refrigerator or something. But, there probably people that could offer a lot. I don't know. And not just homes, but some other buildings around. That's just a thought.
Since there were several questions now,
Well, I was just going to say that I'll try, if you are on our e-list, I will try to get more connected to what's going on so I can let you know what the needs are and have people respond as they can. Thanks, Barney.
what we're really learning here is that getting engaged in some of these actions is something that changes us as we come back home in our own churches. It changes the way we live our Christian lives, it changes the way we think about God, the questions that we raise. So it's not just what we do out there, but I often talk about how outreach is connected to inreach. This is coming home, and great imagine if that hit the ground in our churches, what would we do?
One of the things that I think I struggled with constantly throughout my years of ministry, that I grew up in a family system where conflict happened continuously. But Jesus was supposed to make us nice. So we go to church and conflict happened continuously, but we were told Jesus was supposed to make us nice. So we tried to kind of manage that. Usually then it got challenged, taken out of the preacher and somehow. But one of the things over the years that I found fascinating is that we've seen in church think that we accomplish something week in and week out. If we leave feeling good or positive or fill in the blank, I think few people think that it would be a good Sunday if they left being, excuse the expression, as mad as hell. We can watch Frontline on PBS and we can be mad. Or we can watch one of the other things on PBS and we can be mad. But we don't see church as a place where we can find our anger. And it seems to me that when we look at some of these issues, and we're confronted with some of the realities of Occupy people are most helpful in that there's the ability to own the anger that's right, that's appropriate. It's a kind of righteous indignation and anger that many of us who go to church ought to feel, but have it constantly kind of squashed. And so maybe what revival in the church would look like is for us, at least 2 Sundays a month, to leave church feeling that anger and knowing that there's an appropriate nature about being angry about the injustice taking place to our neighbors, children, our grandchildren, our grandparents, fill in the blank, workers across the country, and that the anger be then transferred into some specific actions that I think we're talking about. So often, again, discussion groups help us unwind and unpack the anger, and so it diffuses our ability to be mobilized. But as I watched the Occupy movement across the country, I thought, there's anger there, we need some. There's a good kind of anger that we need today to utilize in our individual spiritual terms.
Thanks so much for that comment. There was an old medieval debate about whether Jesus laughed or not. And no, it was very which way they wanted to that debate. But the debate whether Jesus was angry, I think, is a lot clearer. We have very clear evidence that Jesus himself got quite angry at times. And I think what you're saying is really important. There's a sort of a good anger that doesn't have to be suppressed, or if it is suppressed, you lose something valuable. That good anger can actually move us to make a difference. And there are many biblical traditional precedents for that. unfortunately, we've lost a lot of it. Now, that's part of that logic of the 1% that's shaping everything else. But that's what we have to overcome. So for those of you who've been involved with the Dallas Area Interfaith, IAF, Industrial Areas Foundations, have very often used anger as an organizing tool. The real question is how can we use that constructively rather than destructively. But thanks for that comment. I think that is very important for us.
I have a comment to his statement. I really don't need the microphone. I'm sorry. I was a cheerleader in high school and I learned how to project. So if you can't hear me, I'm sorry. Maybe the great debater with Denzel Washington proved that you could learn how to be civil in a debate and argument. You learn how to get up in front of a crowd or an audience and debate civically. But he also had an opportunity to go into the farmers in his area and discuss with them what was going on, the mistreatment of them, the work labor and so forth. And so those of you who have watched the movie know what I'm speaking about, that in one area he was showing that he was a part of the civil movement. On the other hand, he was part of the crowd that was that wanted some change. They wanted something different. And so he was working with students and he was working with the community. And I think that as a minister's daughter, I grew up in the ministry. My dad was a United Methodist minister, so we did a lot of social work. We had people come to our door 2 or 3 o'clock in the mornings, wanting money, wanting food, wanting clothes. And we were the food bank, we were the clothing thrift store in that little small town. And to say about the anger, I think whenever we become angry, we become them. So we have to be very constructive with the anger to make sure that we don't cross over that line and become the 1% who keep their anger wrapped in their tight-knit group because they know they can. They don't have to say anything because they are in control of the 99%. So what we have to do is be able to be like Denzel Washington, be able to have civility and show that we can be staying strong, but at the same time have that undercurrent movement going on as in the Underground Railroad. Being able to have a movement that's seen in the 99% doing the occupiers. They are doing a great job. At the same time, we have to have an undertow to be able to carry forward more movement. So you have the tide going this way, ebb and flow, that's constant, where the 1% don't know where that movement is.
Thank you. Yes. I mean, think about anger very clearly. It has to be a constructive sort of thing that Ed Milton was talking about, rather than a destructive sort of controlling thing that we very often see. That's not going to help us also.
Hi, my name is Diane. I'm a teacher in the ISD, and I'm 51 years old. And I guess I'm part of the audience that y'all are trying to reach. And instead of blaming the Dallas Morning News, I would like to just put the mirror back on that a little bit. When you are so unfocused and shooting in so many directions with every individual anger, when you're talking about 99%, you're talking about almost everyone. And almost everyone is not focused. If you want more action in the city, and I live in the city, and you're going to compare yourself to the civil rights movement, then understand how the civil rights movement in the city worked. And it worked with separate groups going after separate things. I'm a product of the integration in Dallas. I'm 51, born in 1960, to put that in perspective. My generation was the one that everyone experimented on. And I left the Holy Trinity Catholic Church school in Bishop Lynch's Skyline, which was the first naturally integrated school in the city. When you talk about the women's movement of the 70s, when I was in high school, gay rights activism, HIV, when people were discriminating against AIDS victims in the 80s, you had to focus to just say, well, we want change. It means nothing to me as a teacher when I'm fighting against gangs and drug abuse, alcohol abuse for my kids, physical abuse, bullying, teen pregnancy, tax testing, STAR testing, and everything else. I'm going to let you know right now, if you're trying to reach the young minorities of the city, you have failed. My kids in my school are 90% minority, and these are the kids that y'all think y'all are fighting for change for the next generation. We even had a teacher in our school who's part of the Occupy Downtown movement at heart. And the kids hadn't got a clue that this was going on in the city, and it wasn't because the Dallas Morning News wasn't created. They don't know the Dallas Morning News either. My recommendation is you're going to have to focus and bring people out. If you're going to pick something like you talk about the labor issues and things like that, I'm a union, I used to be a union officer. I don't think it required money. I don't know hunger that well back to our school issues, so I might want to get involved with that. But this city is the 1% controlling it. Trust me, I'm in the ISD. I know about the 1%. They're my bosses. Okay, so if we have a collection of them in a couple of weeks and they're running candidates, you want to change the city, change the school board. Don't vote for their candidates. Get in a new mindset. We educate 157,000 students in the city. You want to change the city. That's your 99%. Focus on issues and get it out there. But being angry and sitting in a tent, I'm going to be honest, guys, that doesn't do a thing for me. Going against Citibank doesn't mean anything to me if you don't give me a logical, local alternative. Farmers markets give me an alternative to agribusiness. You know, even homeschoolers to the ISD. But if you say, well, we don't like Citibank, we don't like Bank of America, well, then tell me what to do. Give me a logical thing that actually can be scaled up in the city. And then you'll have much more success because the 1% do control the city. We are the ultimate. And when you say that we're a docile city, I'm going to say something very rude here, but most of us are of age. There's a president killed in this town. This is not a docile city in the least. Okay? I went to high school in the 70s with the riots. This is not a docile city. It looks like it on the surface. But if you want activism, you're going to have to tell me what I need to become active for, not just tell me to be active. And I think there are so many people in the city that are likely to have jobs that want to do something every day. But we're not going to go sit in the park in the tent. I did that in the Army for 9 years. I'm not going to do that. You know, give us something specific and short term and something that we can do because some of you have such commitment and love for this, and we so respect you for that commitment. But I'm just as committed to my students. That's how I have 99%. But I'll be honest, the teachers in the city, we don't feel it. We hear that everyone is so sorry for us. God bless you. And then they keep voting for the same people that hurt us. So, thank you.
Thanks for that comment. I don't know how much time you have, maybe just a concluding comment from me at this point. The call to be focused is a crucial one. I think this is something that we have to take very seriously. Now, I'm assuming here, though, tonight that in some ways you are already focused on various projects. I know you represent various organizations, various groups. And so my mission here is not to say that's what you have to focus on, but very clearly that you have to be focused on something. I strongly recommend labor, to be sure. Remember, sometime talking to some donors, they were saying, well, you talk about labor all the time. Can't we talk about race issues, and women's issues, and immigrant issues? And I said, well, if you came and joined us in the Worker Rights Board and Job with Justice, that's exactly what we're doing, because that is what comes together in the labor issues. This is something that brings together issues of immigration, race, gender, and so on. So this is certainly an example. However, what I think is important as far as Occupy goes is not so much sitting against and complaining, but bringing people with these various focal points to recognize each other, to realize that there are people that come from the teachers union that represent DSID, DTISD, that represent Job with Justice, that represent DACA, that represent churches that may have some focus also. I sometimes get cynical perhaps on the focus that churches have, but I grant you that there's some of that going on too. If those people come together and realize that we have different focal points, but our project is bigger, we're the 99% in the sense that we're pulling together from these various focal points and realize that we're not running against each other, but we're ultimately on the same side. And if the young people were to see that, namely, that we're not just playing our own games, trying everybody, to join my club or my group, to buy my books and that sort of stuff, but that this is a common cause, that might actually motivate them as well. And I'm so hopeful that people can enter into that broader community level. But I definitely, this is really my closing note here, strongly recommend finding that focus, or if you have it, developing more in such a sense that they realize how we all belong together and how these various points of work that we're doing can intersect. That is the theological part, ultimately. That's the question, where do you find God? Perhaps in all places. So thank you so much. Hope we keep up the conversation. I know there are more Faith Voices series. There's another lecture coming up, so thank you. One more comment, since we've been talking about TPP, so here's Bob Cash that's organizing this in our area.
Hi, I'm Bob Cash. I'm with the Texas Fair Trade Coalition, which is a organization that we have about 40 groups throughout Texas, labor unions, religious organizations, human rights groups, environmental groups. We're working with a national coalition in May 8th to May 18th. The Trans-Pacific Partnership free trade negotiations are coming to the city of Madison at the Intercontinental Hotel. The negotiations were led by the former mayor of Dallas, Ron Perk, who is the U.S. Trade Representative now. And whether one has formed a position on free trade and thinks that NAFTA has done good things for NAFTA or the World Trade Organization, or thinks it's done bad things for our economy, the main issue we're raising here, I think, is the one that everybody can agree on, and that is that this is the largest trade agreement that we've ever negotiated. This is going to include the U.S., Australia, Brunei, Chile, Malaysia, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, Vietnam. There's a possibility of the Philippines, Japan, Mexico, Canada. And so this will affect our country greatly. And at this point in negotiations with every other free trade negotiations we've ever had, the text has been released. The text, what they've provided so far has been released, so churches and unions, environmental groups, conservative think tanks, the public can see what's being negotiated in our name. For the first time, these negotiations have been declared secret for the entire duration of negotiations. They just announced that there's a new rule that anyone who has any access to the text cannot release it publicly for 4 years or until the time that the agreement is released and introduced to Congress. And once the agreement is released, once it's agreed upon by negotiators and released to Congress, it cannot be amended. It only can be voted up or down. And so, however, there are 600 primarily corporate lobbyists, corporate representatives who do have access to it. Not any of us here. But, and so the main issue that we're trying to raise is that this text of an agreement, which is the largest free trade agreement, which we don't want to be in NAFTA Pacific. We want to have free trade agreements. I mean, trade agreements could actually be good things. They have to follow the law. And we want to make sure that this one is, or at least we have some input. The last thing I'll say is that so far from the statements of the U.S. Trade Representative Ambassador Kirk, from statements of negotiators of the countries, and one portion of the text which actually was leaked, which dealt with access to medicines, it doesn't look good. The portion dealing with access to medicines actually rolled back very good reforms that, surprisingly, I never say these words, that the George W. Bush administration put in free trade agreements that they negotiated, which help developing countries get access to drugs cheaper and generic drugs. The portion of the Texas beat showing that now those reforms were rolled back, and the big pharmaceutical companies got everything they wanted. And so that's really the only public portion that was legal, so we think we know about it. So on May the 12th at 1 o'clock in Addison, at the Addison Circle Park, part of the park, I know it's a bowl, but it's the part you see as soon as you come up. There's going to be a rally that this time is endorsed by the Texas Fair Trade Coalition, Texas CIO, Sierra Club, Public Citizen, Occupy Dallas, Texas Farmers Union, another national farm organization, Job of Justice, and several other groups. And our main demand is transparency. We just want to know what's being negotiated in our bank.
What time?
1 o'clock, Saturday, May 12th. I have some information and some leaflets Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bobby.